All right. So let's start out by taking a look at the schedule. February 28th. So the lecture for today is the original lecture that I wrote up for this class, pre-responsive design. And instead of rewriting that same lecture as then converting that to a responsive design lecture, I'm supplementing then things with a few other lectures, two from my class at UW, three actually from my class at UW, and then one of a lecture that I wrote up basically for this class, but as a lecture or as an article that you may have seen on my business site. But one way, shape, or form, and again, that's the drinking game. Did everybody bring their drinks? Only me? Every time I say one way, shape, or form, you guys got a drink. Okay. So, building an HTML template for Master Art. So, basically, this right here is a layout that is probably the best visual design you've ever seen of a website ever, right? But it is taken from a standard design or a standard build that I came up with years and years ago, based off of, as we were all in the web design industry. Well, let's just say it like this. Do you remember back when web design first came out, or the web first came out, and you saw lots of pages that maybe had an image, some center-to-line text, and maybe an email address, and that was it, right? Then came putting things, aligning things to a grid, so on and so forth, and then we were using tables to do layout. Does anybody remember using tables to do layout, right? Mm-hmm. Tables were never, ever, ever meant to do layout, but because there wasn't any other way to do multi-column layouts. So again, I'm recording this lecture, but here's the thing, recording this lecture, I have one or two options. If I want to draw on the whiteboard, I can turn this camera on, turn off the projector and up, and draw on the whiteboard, or I can tell you guys that I'm going to go draw on the whiteboard in the back, right? So again, if you are looking at me record this lecture, you see that I'm doing just the screen. So I'm going to go draw on the back board, and I will take photographs of that and upload them to my site. Okay? But back in the day, when we were learning how to build stuff, we might have had then a layout where we had a table, right, that we had two cells, right? One row, two columns. This would be a table cell, that would be a table cell. And maybe we gave this one a width of something. We brought it over. Put the navigation over here. We had our text over there. And that's kind of what the websites looked a long time ago. So ultimately what we started doing here was we started exploring the need for columns in website design, right? And back in the probably late 90s, early 2000s, the way it was commonly done then was we used tables to do that. The tricky thing was, does anybody remember embedding a table within a table within a table? Right? Let me show you an example. I have a portfolio piece that I keep live just to show you old school what I'm talking about. So portfolio. This was one that I did probably 2001, maybe. The good old Whispering Music Venue website. And this is kind of along the lines of what I have drawn up on the board, right? The need for a left-hand column that then we had a navigation area. We might have had a logo up there. Then we had a piece of text. This one came out all the way to the edge of the browser screen because back then browsers didn't go all the way out to 1920. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. There you go. Ooh, yeah. Right? But if we look at this code, a table inside a table, v-align, width, height, right? And this was back in the day, again, when you may have done it along with me, you were wrestling Dreamweaver and making tables and embedding stuff, and it just wasn't practical. And finally, I'm going to say around 2002, 2000, yeah, somewhere around there, CSS became a lot more popular, and we still needed layouts like this that had columns in it, but instead of then using tables to do that, we were switching over to doing CSS columns. And as things progressed by about, I can't remember when I wrote this one up here, but by about, I don't know, 2006, 2007, somewhere in there, right? Remember, if we go back to then the content layout design lecture, and we looked at the arranging content into a meaningful order, can we all kind of agree that over the years, there has been a pretty simplified website design where we have a branding up top. We may have a main navigation, which is horizontal top center underneath the branding, right? A lot of times that's what we do. Sometimes we'll stick the logo over to the left and the navigation up top right, depending on what we're doing. And then if this is a homepage type layout, we will have, so this is probably an interior page, right, where we have then Raisin Bread instructions. We have our main content, our number 3 main content. And then we have a sidebar that has our supplemental content on it. And this is pretty big for a sidebar, right? It looks like a second column. But practically speaking, right, again, if we look at the 1, 2, 3, 4s, what we talked about earlier was, and this is taken from that Transcendent CSS, the fine art of web design book, branding, navigation, main content, supplementary content. But if we look at this layout, right, it's pretty similar to the layout of my school website, right, where we have a header, okay, this is text instead of a logo, but we still have essentially the brand, right, the name of the website that links back to the home page. We have over on the right-hand side, we may have our utility menus, we may have our search functionality, we have then a main menu that is horizontal top center, we have a main content area, and we have a supplementary content area, meaning if this is the lecture at hand, right? So for those of you watching this video at home, again, you don't know what I'm pointing at on the projector, but let's say this piece of content in here, right, is the main content area, right? And supplemental content might be stuff like, oh, what's the latest video? What's the latest photo? So on and so forth, right? So kind of my point then is, does this look like a standard design? Yeah? Okay. So as time went by, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say all of us got used to that as kind of a standard design, right? How many of you are looking at your designs for your web pages that you've done in this class, and you've got a closely related design to that, okay? Where it may differ then is on the home page, you might have, and I'm going to go to an example out of my UW class. So if we were on an interior page, the about page, right, we might have, again, the logo, the navigation, the main content area, the supplementary content, or the sidebar area. We have an area down here for the footer information. If we're on the home page, let me go out on a limb here too and say, well, traditional home pages, you might have been used to seeing something like this, where you have a spotlight rotating something or other, right? And you possibly have what I'm going to call widget boxes, right? Meaning, again, if we look at one of the websites that we've taken a look at in here in this class in the past, it's Anthrotech website. You remember me showing you this? So our spotlight, our widget boxes, possibly more information, more widget boxes, so on and so forth. To me, I look at this layout, and this is no different. Stay with me here, right? I look at this layout, and it's no different to me than this one, okay? Meaning, the way our page is ultimately designed, the way where our page is ultimately produced, okay? So in this lecture, then, here's kind of an old drawing, right? Where I have the header area, the navigation area. So if you're seeing here, background header, right? Background navigation, background middle, background footer. What I'm trying to say is, what do you start seeing here? A series of horizontal boxes, right? Okay. So I'm going to point something out here. I'm going to point where, as much as I like this book, this HTML by Duckett, HTML and CSS by Duckett book, I have a really huge disagreement with one part of the book. How many of you have used this book in Web 110 or Web 120, right? It's a fantastic book, except for one part. And here's the one part I disagree with. HTML layout, 428. I've got to find the one page in the book. Or there it is. All right, took me a little long. I disagree with this drawing here. Okay. Here's why I disagree with that. because this is where we're coming from, right? In other words, can we all agree that this kind of a layout, this kind of design looks about 2007 or so, right? And this looks more modern, right? So this might be along the lines of what you guys are going to be doing in this day and age, or a middle ground might be something like they redid the HCD site again after I had done it a few years ago. Would you say that this is kind of a relatively popular design, right? Meaning if I go to this prototype that never got finished, right? This looks along the lines of this, which is pretty much your modern website layout that pretty much most websites kind of adhere to, give or take a few things, right? What if I told you this and this is the exact same build as this? Would you believe it? Not so quickly. Here's what I mean. Going back to this drawing right here. Look at this drawing. Start seeing things in horizontal layouts, right? We look at this and we go to our content that we were talking about, our branding, our main content, our supplemental content. Look at it. Branding, horizontal across the top. Navigation, horizontal across the top. Spotlight, right? You start seeing things kind of like this, right? So I'm going to erase. So I lied. I'm not going to take a picture of that anymore because it's not really worth taking a picture of, right? But if we look at this layout, here's what I mean. I'm actually going to go on the other side, so I could have kept that up there. Here's what I mean. And so can we get whiteboards that have so I can illustrate those? Like you can get like graph paper. Well, just, you know, I always, when I get drawing like this, I have to draw really slow, otherwise my lines will be skewed. They're going to be skewed anyway. So this is the home page.
You want me to scroll down?
No. Now my drawing is going to get silent. Okay. But this is how I see this. Why, so on and so forth. Button. There we go. Blah, blah, blah. Some links up here. Navigation items. So that's what I just drew up there, true or not? Right. What's the only difference? Navigation. Right? Comes out. Spotlight comes out. Okay? So this is why I say it's the basic same fundamental design. If I then look at, I go back to this. I'm going to go to the lecture from my HCDE class, lecture size, page layout for your web page. Okay. So here's what I've got going on, right? We have a header box, we have a navigation box, we have a content box that then has 1 column, 2 columns. We have a footer, right? So what if then I wanted to start incorporating visual design into this, right? So again, if we have our design in Illustrator that we then need to put into a build, let's say, I've gotten to the space where I just use my same build over and over and over again. I have not come across a design, at least that I haven't designed, or I still really feel like I haven't come across, well, there are designs out there that don't fall into my build, but I'm going to say this design and this design both fall into not that build, this basic build, right? Horizontal things across the top. So if I look back at that drawing back here then, I can say, basically, you guys like using IDs or like using classes? Does anybody know what I mean? Yeah. Use both. Why would you use an ID? Versus a class. What does an ID do? In other words, what I'm saying is, right. So, how I typically use classes and IDs differently. And you'll get people that'll argue with me and tell me that what I'm doing is stupid. Like Thomas Wilbur. You remember Thomas Wilbur? Right? He hated that I used IDs. And he would always tell me why, mathematically, in terms of the point system, why I shouldn't use IDs. Right? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's a hierarchy. Right. And to me, he would lose me. Like, just completely lose me. Right? So I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm not saying he's right because I didn't understand it. But the guy is smart, so he's probably right. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm saying is, I use IDs for things like header. Nav. Say I'm fond of using the term for this one right here. In other words, if I have header, navigation, and I have footer down at the bottom, I'm using the ID of footer down here, right? Then this one, that's kind of in the middle. Oh, middle. Why don't I use the term body? That's a tag's name. So I don't want to, that to me is like saying using header tag with the ID of header. Just, right? Now, I'll be honest with you guys. I'm still using div tags instead of using header tag for this and footer tag for that. To me, right, you can use header tags and footer tags. Don't shake your head at me, right? Header ID footer or header ID header just doesn't really. What do I have? Okay, so what do I have drawn up here? Page 1. What are these called? Divisions. I've got a bunch of page divisions. So what is div short for? Division. So I'm still, you can use header and footer, you can use whatever tags you want. You gotta figure out your style. If you want to use headers with classes, hey, knock yourself out. I don't care, right? Everybody does things a little bit differently. All I'm trying to get across is I have these sections the way I have these. Now I'm not using section tags because these are not appropriate to be used as section tags. You may use a header tag, a nav tag, a main tag. Just be careful about a main tag. I can't remember how far back in Internet Explorer a main tag doesn't work, right? I want to say like even IE9 and IE10 main tag doesn't work, right? Yeah, I may be wrong. Somebody look it up and tell me. Right? What do you mean? Like the tag subject? Well, because that can be semantic. Yes, I would dock you for that. No, it is semantic, right? Because these are page divisions. Now, if you did a footer tag and header tag, I'd make fun of you. Because that'd be semantically incorrect. But if you want to do header, nav, div, don't use a section for this one, because that's semantically incorrect. A section tag is like using a table of contents, right? Section, okay? And again, a main tag. So when I started using HTML5, right? And I did header nav, and I originally called this one, used a section tag, a footer tag, and I was real proud of myself. I patted myself on the back for my first use of HTML5. Then I realized, being fortunate at some discussions, that we found out that a section tag was not semantically correct for that area. So I went back and I had two choices: use main tag that wasn't available yet, or go back to use the div tag. Article I would use for, so if I then have header, so let's say we're on an interior page, or a main level page. Using an article or side tag. This is the use of the article tag here, right? The main content area. Your side then is your anything that is outside of the main content that is supplementary content. Yeah, sidebar, right? So you could very well then do header, nav, footer, right? And this one, can somebody look up the compatibility of the main tag yet? Wayne? Huh? Right. So what's the purpose of that? It's a great tag to use, right? Except for Internet Explorer, right? So let's say we use just for main purposes here.
I think it's IE8. IE8 does not like the main tag.
Yeah. Really? Okay. All I know is that it doesn't work. So I've stayed away from it. Therefore, I went back to using a div tag for my middle area, and that, because of my OCD, was just I couldn't take it, right? It was one, I had apples, 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 orange, apples, 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 right? And so I had to go back to just using div tags all the way around, right? It doesn't matter, right? If they tell you search engine optimization, look at my search engine optimization, right? All I'm saying is, div tags, people make fun of you, that's fine. I'm good with that. If you want to use HTML5 tags, knock yourself out. That's semantically correct what you want to do. Okay? But what I'm saying is, look at these in terms of spatial elements. Right? So then, if we have here, in terms of space, the header element, in other words, if I inspect this page, right? I've got my header area, I've got my navigation. This one I used content as the label. Then I used, well, look at that, an article tag there, Christopher, right? and then in a side tag. And I use the ID of text, ID of sidebar, ID of footer. But what I'm saying is, this to me right here is no different than, let's say we went in, I don't know, mission facts and statistics, right? So looking at this page right here, well, the only difference that this page has over top of my design is one of two things. Possibly they have one extra element in here, right? So if we look at this, how they've got it, now keep in mind this is built on Drupal, and Drupal is famous for div inside a div, inside of a div, inside of a div, inside of a div. Anybody use Drupal in here? I don't recommend it. When I was working on their site using Drupal, oh my God, I couldn't, every time I looked up how to do something, it wasn't like WordPress where you go to the codex and you can read it and understand it and figure out how to do something. I just ended up on one user forum after another, and couldn't figure out anything. I went back to WordPress and that was it, okay? But what I'm saying here is, okay, they have an extra element for the hero image. Okay, so why not then if you need any extra elements in here, right? Again, I would see that as, great, I'll stick an extra element horizontal in space. I will stick an extra element horizontal in space and just keep on stacking them, right? So that's what I mean by the design that I have going. This design is basically, in my humble opinion, Lisa's out of the class. It's the shit, right? It works. That is not to say don't download my templates and reuse them. Raise your hand. Raise it. Risk. I will not. Save. Download. Mike's template. And turn that in. Great. You're going to write all your code yourself. You just swore it up. Good. Good. So, but again, what if you need that color to go all the way out? What do? So let's talk about this. How do I get this? So let's say from our grid that we're using, right? So remember when we talked about the 960 grid? So here then is the 960 grid columns that I basically stole that image, right? So how then are you going to get those elements to be 980 across in the center? Okay, what if you need a navigation all the way out? You're going to put something outside the body tag? Here's what I'm saying. What you're talking about is using the body tag as a page route. Don't. Huh? You can, but if you have, right. But listen to me. If you have a design where you have a navigation color and stuff going all the way out to the edge of the browser, this gets back to, if I used a wrapper, what would I have to do? I would still have to have another wrapper around this area to get this to sit in the center. In other words, this leads me back to the problem with this, okay? So this is a common layout that people get taught that I cringe at. And here's what I mean. It is common for you to do that page ID wrapper, right? And give a width to that. Okay, so you have a fixed width, or you have a width. Again, then what if you have a navigation background that needs to go out full width? What do? Oh, you can't do that. That's what I'm saying, right? So in other words, to get that background to go all the way out, here's what you do. So if I open up, now you can download my whole HCDE Git repository if you want to, okay? So if I open up this page layout for your web page, right? And then let me take this and make a new tab. Drag this over into the new tab, right? If I had a wrapper around this, right? In other words, what I want to do is I want to have these elements sitting in space, but I want another element around the navigation. Here's what I mean. If I want a navigation bar to go all the way out to the edges while still having these navigation items sit in the center like that, again, look at the grid. Look at this hard edge right here, right? So you want that navigation element to stay, let's say, max width 980 and centered. So how are you going to center it? What? But still, how are you going to get these elements? Here's what I'm saying, right? In other words, this box, how do you get that box centered? Yes, with CSS, but how specifically? Right. So if we look at the code then, right, I'm using the default box model. So if I have this navigation area, I have a width of 940, right? I have padding 10 top and bottom, 20 left and right. Does that make sense? So do you guys know both box models? Do you know box sizing border box? Okay, that's the bootstrap box model. Okay, in other words, if I said box sizing border box on this element, save, and refresh. Now, let's say it like this. Let's go to the default box model. The default box model, if I want something to be 980 wide, in other words, if I comment out the padding here, right? And the width is 940, it's only going to occupy 940 in space, right? If I want there to be padding on it, so if I want it to be 980, without padding, it'll occupy 980 pixels horizontal width in space. But if I take padding out of it, remember, if you do horizontal padding, in other words, left and right padding, it is going to then add that to the width of your element. No, I don't want to translate this page. I know it's in Latin. It's lorem ipsum. Quit asking me. Right? Does that make sense in terms of the default box model? So if you use then the bootstrap box model, right? It doesn't add padding to the width of the element. Who's following me with what I'm talking about? Okay, so you can start with the bootstrap box model all the way around if you want to. I typically don't because I just, I'm stuck in my ways a little bit. I only use the bootstrap box model on images because if you do 100% on an image and it is a child element inside of a parent element, and you say 100%, but then you add padding and border to it, it's going to be 100% plus padding and border. So getting that responsive width to actually work is a nightmare unless you use the bootstrap box model. I would actually probably encourage you guys to just use this box model all the way around, meaning put that setting up in your star selector, your CSS reset, and do margin 0, padding 0, box sizing, border box. Who's already doing that? Spengler works out good for you? Yeah. Here's the thing. It used to be the default in Internet Explorer. It's the one and only thing Internet Explorer ever got right. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Yes, I did mean to say that, but you know what I'm saying, right? So if then I want that element to be, like I said, I'm just going to get rid of that. If I want that element to be a fixed width, in space, I would then use margin auto left and right. That gets it to sit in the center. So now what if I want a color to go all the way out to the edge? If I have then a page wrapper all the way around that I said width 980, I can't get the navigation element, the color, to go out all the way to the edge of the browser, right? So what I've seen as a hack, or what I've seen in practice, let's go to this site, inspect. Container. It's absolutely useless. What are you containing? What is a container? Why do you need a container? What are you containing? Close. Different objects that have what property associated to them? What? Let's rip on this one here. So therefore, if I get rid of that page wrapper, and I have this content ID floated left, and this aside floated right, that content ID is going to go all the way out until it can't go anymore. This aside is going to go all the way out until it can't go anymore. Therefore, you need a what? A container to contain that. That is what a containing element is, right? Is to contain floated elements, so far as I've deduced over the years, right? So therefore, if you look at then, this layout here, I have one element floated right, one element floated left, and I have a containing element around it so that they don't go past that width mark. Does that make sense? So that's to me how I use a container. But let's get back to the navigation. Bella, what am I going to do here? You said it earlier. You don't even have to set it to 100%. So if I'm going to put a navigation wrap on this, essentially, have you ever explored the inner outer? You've heard that. It's basically what we're doing. So if we look back there, we have a navigation outer and a navigation inner set of divs. So right here, we have an outer and an inner. So therefore, if on this navigation wrap, I don't even have to give it a width. Why? What level of an element is it? It's a block level element. Block level elements do what by default? They go the full width unless you tell them otherwise. Inline level elements, how far do they go? Whatever is inside their containing element, right? So an image only goes so far as there's an image. Does that make sense? So since this is a block level element, then what you can do is just give it a background color, right? So looking at that, I still have my navigation sitting in the center because it is given a width, given a margin right, left and right auto. This is why I say that that old design, that old layout from way back when, I still think it's a really solid layout. If you can come up with a more solid layout, I'd love to see it. I'm not trying to be egotistical by saying, well, maybe a little bit. Not really, right? I'm challenging you, Josh. Yeah, you specifically. Dan.
That's how you did Jet City, right?
Yes and no. If we look at the Jet City, because that's your most favorite website ever. You've never seen the Jet City website? Well, let me show you. That's what I did on the footer. That's how I got the color on the footer to go all the way out, right? And for this, how did I get this over top that color? Negative margin, right? But this is still the identical layout, the identical build to this build right here, okay? So what I would encourage you guys to do is, the good thing about that HCD 532 curriculum is when I was writing that curriculum, the story on that class was when I was doing my master's degree, they found out that I taught here at Seattle Central and they were like, ooh, guess what you can do for us, right? And they started having me TA the user-centered design class where ultimately I taught the labs, right? The HTML, CSS labs. And then as I was leaving, they were like, oh, what are we gonna do now? Oh, I know, let's make it into its own class so you can still teach it, right? And as I was writing the lecture, the whole time I was thinking about how do I want my students in WEB200 to build their projects? So that curriculum also doubles as a roadmap of how you can build your project here in WEB200. Okay, so there is the series of lectures, creating your first web page. So from page layout to visual design to multiple pages for your website, contact form for your website, image slider with jQuery, make your website responsive. Okay. I would go look at those, and as well, if you want to see the videos, for the past 2 or 3 quarters, I have been recording those lectures as I'm doing them, if you want to see me build those on the fly, right? But essentially, again, these show you how to go ahead and build this. Okay, so let me ask you this. Do I kind of have you guys sold on this, doing this in space, kind of like that, right? Again, if you want to use whatever HTML5, you want to call your IDs whatever you want to call them, great.
I also don't have the instruction manual.
You don't? Yeah, yours doesn't. So, I mean, yours is, you know. So the next thing then becomes, well, what if you need to have an image file in there, right? Okay. So, good thing that Smashing Magazine wrote up an article a while back that Chris Sullivan, our former dean, passed off to us instructors. I don't know where it is, but it's something about how do you build websites in this day and age. And it said something in there about de-emphasize slicing images. Meaning, excuse me, Where this design right here falls apart is in terms of the background images. Okay? So no longer then do I have to make my images in Illustrator and Photoshop with drop shadows and gradients and that kind of stuff, because I can do that in CSS3, right? So back in this day, what I was fond of doing was slicing out those whole sections of images, right? And then saving them as one big image across, right? We're not there anymore because a couple of different factors. One, we can do drop shadows in CSS. Two, we can do gradients in CSS. Three, it's got to be responsive, right? It's not responsive. So you can make imagery responsive if you want. It's difficult. No, it's not difficult, but it's kind of a, let me show you what I'm talking about. So if we go to my personal blog, this then is built along the lines of half kind of newfangled stuff, half old from that lecture. See you later. Yeah. Where I used a background image as the top image. I used an image that repeated, right, as the middle image. Thank you for watching your language, everybody. Motherfuckers. Right? And then the footer image down here. Right? So I can set those images to be the background width of 100%. And as then it comes in space, in terms of the responsive stuff, you can then see those images, right, actually respond with the whole design as well. But that's just not how we're really designing much anymore. We're basically designing with a lot of flat colors and background imagery only when we need it, okay? So for instance, I'm gonna say, this has more background imagery than a typical website has. And that's because I wanted to then have the skyline as an artwork, piece of artwork, and then the background here for the water. So this is more image heavy than a typical website needs to be in this day and age. True? Let's say it like that. So, and according to a lot of your designs, what I saw was a lot of flat colors, right? Which is good, with some imagery. That's how things should be. In other words, where is the imagery in here? Well, there might be a background image up there, those lines, right? So if we inspect up there, oops. In strip. In strip UI. Oh, I'm not seeing a background image, but that's possibly the only background image in this design, right? You guys want me to show you how to place a background image in a div? You guys know how to do that already, right? Great, I don't have to worry about that. So let's talk about responsiveness then. How many of you are comfortable with responsive? How many of you are super comfortable with responsive? Okay, so I'll tell you my way of doing it. if then we go back to documents, make your website responsive, styles. Actually, let me just go to the GitHub repository. I'm going to open up another tab, Dwayne.
Okay. And this was the site that was on Drupal?
This was done in Drupal.
Okay.
Drupal.
Okay.
Drupal sounds like RuPaul.
Not a bad thing.
True.
Okay. So I saw some like the WordPressy.
Yeah.
elements.
Yeah. So this is done in Drupal. But again, it's the exact same. And like I said, what they did here was they built this theme from an earlier version of a theme that I had seen and looked at how it was built, right? Again, it's a very, very similar build, right? But in terms of then, if we go back and then take a look at make your website responsive, right? If then we look at an interior page like this, okay? And we look at it as it comes in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? How many of you are still going desktop down? How many of you are going mobile first? How many of you know which is which and what to do? Okay. Spengler, what's the advantage of going mobile first? Why are you going that way?
Because you want to start with the most strict set of restrictions. That's enough sense. But you want
Oh, I see. So you're not telling things to hide.
Yeah, you want to go with the design that has the most easy to expand.
Okay. So when it comes to multi-columns like that, do you have problems with that? Or are you able to do that?
With mobile, I've gone single column, and then I have the aside topic to a hammer if it's appropriate, otherwise go down to the contents. So I don't do double column.
So what I'm saying is on your desktop layout, does it, yeah, you still have two columns like this. And in your mobile, this one goes underneath there. So you're still doing that kind of, okay? So in other words, as this comes down in size, a typical layout then is, if I have these three boxes, right? They then stack one after the other, right? If I have this sidebar, typically comes down under there, like that.
It's like, so the two sections is great on the top, the one section is great on the different. Are you doing that before or after the tablet? If you do it before, side taking before the tablet is ridiculous.
Oh, you mean
If you do after, the article was super sweet and
The answer is both. Depends on the project. Okay, so if this were my personal blog, you can see that the columns do contract, right? And if we are at iPad 768, it has the two columns. Now, specifically, because if you're on your tablet, as you are reading an article, I want to entice you with how cute my child and my dog is.
I just feel like it's too narrow for the.
It still falls in the readability zone, though. If we go back to the typography class, and let's say we look at this right here. Let's go back, let's go up to 100%. Okay. This falls, if we're doing 16/24, right? This still falls in the readability zone. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And again,
It's probably just a matter of preference.
It's all, it is, right? Versus if we look at one of my articles here, iPad, single column. So it is, let's say it like this. If I'm on my iPad, now I have an iPad mini, right? So it feels like it's a book. So when I'm on Facebook and I'm going to websites like the Huffington Post or Daily Kos or any of those really super liberal websites, right? They present them to me like this, and it's annoying. A lot of times it's annoying because their sidebar is actually on the left. That's what's really annoying.
Which is a problem for me both in the Canvas app and in the Outlook app.
Right.
So I'm trying to check my emails. and all.
Designers tend to ignore iPads or tend to ignore
I
tablets.
think it's because of the issue I said, it's like it's too small and
Mhm.
too plumb, and it's too big for
Yeah.
the secondary phone.
Yeah. Well,
So it doesn't really fit.
let's say it like this. How is the readability and how is it here?
It's fine, but I just know every time I pull up a two-column layout on my iPad, I'm like, oh, it's a little
Yeah.
too small.
I understand that,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, right there, it looks fine, but what else is looking around?
True, right?
So on my iPad, it would probably.
Right, because the type would probably be, well, if you're on an iPad mini, the type is going to look smaller than on a regular iPad because they're both, I mean, basically you have the same viewport of 768 by 1024, just the iPad mini is scrunched. So the type is a lot smaller than on a full regular iPad, right? So that gets bothersome to me, right? But I would prefer myself this because it is ergonomically like I'm reading a book.
Yeah, I totally prefer that.
Right.
But this is my sidebar, and that's where it gets funky.
It does have a sidebar.
Okay.
Uh-huh. The sidebar has just shifted down to the bottom, right? So it still has a sidebar, it's just down at the bottom, because I think when it gets to mobile, this sidebar is, the only worthwhile piece of call to action that might be worthwhile is the contact.
Yeah, I'm working
Right.
this like whether it's going to be content that we want. People to see.
So, again, it's, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't on an iPad. Let's just say it like that. So if you have content, right, like, just go to any one of their articles. Let's fact check his address tonight. So if we're on an iPad, then look what's in their sidebar. They want the advertising. This is why sidebars on tablets are still there, right? And then when it comes to a phone, they take those advertisements and stick it in the middle of content, right? Let me explain it like this. So a typical sidebar, right? Well, let's say it like this. Hold on. So let's say it like this. If we're looking at the Jet City one, right? A typical sidebar. Oops. Right, where we have the upcoming shows, donate, etc. Again, looking back at that drawing, we would typically snap the sidebar underneath. But when we were doing this one, again, this is where the call to action, what's the hierarchy of the content? Well, what's more important? This or the blog? What's more important for this? This widget, upcoming shows, or the blog? The widget. So therefore, instead of having the whole sidebar snap, this is where I built the sidebar in pieces. Right, so one piece, another piece, another piece, right? So therefore, as these clear, right? Because here at this mobile, right, all of those floats are clear or float none. So if we go to see how then something is built like that, a typical build looks something like if I have a header, right? I change all my widths to max width, right? For the main level, the main elements, the outer elements, right? So I'm going desktop down. Why am I going desktop down? That's how I started. It works, right? That's what I do. Kind of as simple as that. And I've been able to tailor because what I started to see from the mobile first, is then you had designs that looked like they were, like my monitor was a huge phone and I only saw half the real estate. That really, really annoyed me. I've seen pushback and redesigns happening about that now. So that's correcting itself. But that's what I saw with the mobile first phenomenon, and it really rubbed me the wrong way, so I didn't adopt it. And so I adopted the desktop down, and I've had decent success. Whichever way you want to go is whichever way you want to go, right? But one way, shape, or form, what I typically do is, let's say my content, change the width to max width, right? And then the elements inside of it, I still leave at a fixed width at above 1024, right? Once we start coming down below 1024, that's where I will start converting things to percentages, right? So let's take a look at those percentages. How do you do that? Have you guys converted fixed width to percentages? All of you? Huh? True, but let's look at the theory behind it. So you can read through this tutorial. Like I said, it seems like most of you are pretty confident on, how many of you are pretty confident on taking your build, your design, and building it? Okay. So again, if I have a visual width of 980 and then an actual width of 940 because I have padding on either side, right? I would then need to calculate, if this area is 620 and this is 300, I would need to calculate 620 divided by 940, which is 65 point whatever percent. I would need to calculate 300 divided by 940, which is what, 31.9%, okay? Why am I not dividing it by 980? Right, because the actual width in space that takes up is that 940 mark, okay? So I start doing that at 1024 and below, right, as I start converting things to percentages like that. Again, that's just what I do, right? As well, let's go to, So I start using percentages like that for the inner children elements at below 1024, because when I started using percentages, so if I'm at 1024, like it stops at 980, right? If I had percentages up above that, I had funny results when I was doing those images in my personal blog. So therefore, I went with this, and that fixed that issue, right? Again, how you do it is up to you. But this is basically then, you know, and if I have those widgets, right, those 3 across, 300 divided by 940, right? Margin right. Okay. Now, can anybody tell me this? Let's see if you know this trick. If width equals x, margin right equals 20, right? Because we have 20, 20, 20. Uh-oh. How do we take care of this one?
Isn't it negative 20?
There's 2 different ways of doing it. One, on the last child, you can say margin right 0. Right? You can use the last child. Does anybody know what I'm talking about, the last child declaration? The pseudo element. Okay? Or on its parent element, you can do margin right minus 20. It depends on what you're trying to do. Right? If you have more than 3, in other words, to get the last child, how many of you have ever tried to use nth child? How many of you have gotten it to work? Olga got it to work. I tried for like about 15, 20 minutes to get it to work. It didn't work. I was like, right? So instead, what I do is, if we're looking at my video page here, right? Same thing. Fixed width, margin right, margin right, margin right, margin right. So what I do then is on the parent element, so these thumbs all, I'm also using, how many of you have used the calc principle? Oh, this is the best goddamn thing. Start doing this. Because if I have 4 across and I have a 20 pixel gutter, I can say calc width, calc 25% minus 20 for the margin right gutter. Start doing that. I actually linked to a tutorial about that. So if you're looking at my, yeah, so on the content layout lecture for grids, I found an article, Grids, Mozilla, right? That shows you to go how to create a simple framework if you want to go this way, kind of the bootstrap column framework, right? And then it gets into easier calculations using the calc function, right? So basically, how it works is, if I have 4 across, I don't have to calculate the element, like I don't have to put a percentage here and calculate that. So if you notice, as my grids up top, the gutters don't move. They're always 20 pixels. That's using that calc principle. Use it. So that's where if you have a width, calc 33% minus 20. So in other words, this element is 33%, 33%, 33% minus the 20 pixel gutter. So the gutter doesn't flex. The gutter stays fixed. Yeah. Well, I'm using pixels on the 980 grid, on the 960 grid. Yeah, whatever your settings are, your settings. But that's how I do the gutters. And once I started adopting that, I'm not going back. Just not going back. All right, we got a couple more concepts to get to. So anyway, on here then, the parent container, I do, so if these are margin right 20 pixels, right? Then on the parent container, I do a margin right minus 20 so that I don't have to calculate the nth child. They come out and just automatically wrap because it gives you that extra 20 pixels there. That's the way I would go with that. Okay. Two more concepts. Typography. Nope, I've got it. Got it in here. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Do yourself a favor. Use relative units, right? So in this class, I show them how to go from fixed units to relative units because I'm used to mapping stuff out in fixed pixel units, right? And then changing over to relative units. So again, I would say font size 100%, and that will make everything 16 pixels, right? So 16 pixels is 1M, and then go from there, from that measurement. This is straight out of the Ethan North Code book.
Theoretically, the user could change that 100% in the browser. Well, I'm just wondering, so if they.
So
What would that have? So would that throw everything
Huh.
out?
well, I mean, yeah, it would bump up the M square.
Like you would.
You're gonna have to build a snowman. Hashtag let it go. Right? Meaning, you can't control the user. Just let them do it, let them fuck it up, right? But therefore then, if you have 24 pixels, then 24, what is it? 24 divided by 16 is 1.5, and then line height, 100%. I typically do 100% on my headlines, 100 to 120, 25. On my body copy, again, 16 over 24. So 1M over 1.5, right? Most of you in here took the typography class, right? You know what I'm talking about, right? Moving on. The last thing I want to tell you, the toggle menu. Write it your goddamn self. Don't go get a pre-existing navigation thing that you have no idea how it works. Write it yourself. Let me show you the crux or the roots of a toggle menu. It's my last piece of propaganda I want to pass off to you. Okay? So let's start kind of closing some of these things. Okay. Let me see if I can find a working version of this. Did I misspell it? Maybe that dude is hacking that I told to fuck off is hacking my site. Nope, doesn't work. Well, these used to open and close. If I were to view source, I need to get this working for you guys. So, if I were to click the assignments link, it would open up a set of assignments. Let's walk through some JavaScript, shall we? Who loves JavaScript? Who hates JavaScript? Fuck you guys. It's terrible. You should love JavaScript. JavaScript is awesome. Sorry, Chris, I don't mean to, are you guys passing notes?
No.
So, if I had the assignments link that I would click, and it would open up this ID of assignment links. Here's what's happening. Does anybody recognize this style of JavaScript right here? Huh? Yeah? This is the old pre-DOM scripting JavaScript, where you actually wrote the event handler in the function in the code, in the HTML markup, which is not semantic if you want to separate those things. But let's talk about how it works. Function, sliding menu, object ID, object ID. So object ID is a parameter that we're setting up to pass an argument through. Who's with me so far? Okay. This menu equals document.getElementById, object ID.style. So we're using the document object model to look into the document, get the element by ID, and affect the style, meaning the inline style sheet, right? Who's with me so far? Great. If this menu dot display equals block, if it's open, close it. Else, meaning if it's closed, open it. Ladies and gentlemen, you have yourselves a toggle menu right there. Okay? How many of you were able to look at that and walk through reading that? Okay? So, in terms of then, here, if I said on this one, pass the argument of assignment links, which is ID of assignment links. So my understanding of the difference between parameter and an argument, right? Parameter says argument goes here. It's like a shoebox that a shoe goes into. True? Who's with me on that? Spangler? Yeah? Okay. So if I pass assignment links through the sliding menu function, it also gets passed through here. Go get document.getElementById assignment links, and for style, say display equals none or display equals block. Does that make sense? Again, that's how a toggle menu works. So in terms of jQuery, how many of you have used jQuery? Okay. If we then go to here, and do I have where I have it open? It's open again, right? Inspect. So, navigation items, right? See which one it is. Navigation. If it's block, or if it's none, click display block. If it's display block, click display none, right? So if we look at the code for this then, What does the dollar sign mean in jQuery?
Function?
Hmm?
Function?
Yeah. What does it mean here? What? Get element by ID, get element by class name, get element by tag name, get element by window or document or whatever. So, get element by window dot load, okay? Event handler. So when the window loads, load an anonymous function. How many of you have ever seen an anonymous function before? Okay. So basically what we have is, we have this statement right here, which basically says, get element by ID, navigation, click toggle. So in jQuery, that dot toggle is basically, this is what I mean, this is what they mean by it's a framework. Well, back in native JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, whatever you want to call it, back in those days, you had to write out those functions by hand, right? And then what happened was people started coming across similar functions. And they took those functions like toggle, open and close like that, and said, why don't we make a function called toggle that is then buried deep within the jQuery file, right? Does that make sense? So if you load jQuery into your site, I've loaded jQuery. Somewhere in that file is a function called toggle that will open or close stuff, that will then change the display to none or blah, right? So let's walk this backwards. ID of navigation, toggle that. When the ID of toggle is clicked. So when we write a statement like this, we have to write an event handler, and the event handler then calls a function. That in this case, the function is not named. It's not a pre-written function, okay? So it's an anonymous function. In other words, it's a no-name function that has a statement inside it. Does that make sense? So there's two of them. When the window loads, load the functionality of when you click the toggle ID, meaning the hamburger menu, right? Toggle the ID of navigation. Ladies and gentlemen, you have a toggle menu. However, Bella, go ahead.
So the toggle image is a person, but not that it's a human navigation, but navigation is positioned in CSS. And it's not like it's placed inside that. When you press toggle, it has nothing to do with that.
Correct. It's when I click that, so the ID of toggle is in the header here, is that image. So when I click that image, go grab the ID of navigation and change the inline style to either none or block. Okay. Now, what happens here if I do this? And then I open it. Where'd my navigation go? Where'd it go? Well, look at it. It's still saying display none.
So it's hidden.
So it's hidden. Look at the Seattle Central website and do that. Theirs does that too. So here's the thing. JavaScript programming, it's a set of instructions. Ha ha ha, that can't be, that's too simple. No, right? Who's ever heard that and laughed at that? It's a set of instructions. Nobody?
A while back.
You've never heard that? Oh, but what's his face on lynda.com? What's his name? The bald guy, the microphone. You know what I'm talking about? Simon. Anyway, when he is describing that. Okay. So what you have to do then is you have to give it another set of instructions. Close. So if I go to my business site. Let's load a variable, load width. Because did you know, there was a bug. We didn't have to use to do this. We basically could say, if less than 801, hide the navigation, else greater than 800, show the navigation, right? So that's the next set of instructions. But on the iPhone came along, and iOS 8, I think it was, when you open it and then you scroll, resizes the window. Stupid. So I had to adjust that on the Jet City thing. Where then what I had to do was say, load the window.innerWidth when the window loads, right? Save that information. So on resize, if the load width is not equal to the inner width, meaning if it is a horizontal resize and horizontal resize only, right? Show or hide those items. Does that make sense? That's instruction number 2. This should be enough for you guys. I really recommend you guys start hammering. How many of you would like to be better at JavaScript? Hammer it out. Figure out what's going on. Don't go grab a pre-formatted toggle menu and try to integrate it. Because sure enough, there'll be a bug in there, and the WEB200 you're going to ask me how to fix the bug. And I'm going to say, let's look at the code, and I'm going to ask you, well, where in the code is it doing this? And you're going to say, I don't know, I grabbed that from the interwebs. That's happening. Huh? That's what I'm talking about, the CSS menu maker. Don't use it.
Yeah, if you make it yourself.
Yeah, this is making it yourself. But if you go onto the CSS menu maker and plug in stuff, it's going to give you a jQuery file that you didn't write yourself.
What if you yourself make your menu just with CSS?
How are you going to do it without? How are you going to do that without JavaScript?
I don't remember, but I do.
Yeah, you can have context-specific displaying. Like I remember I made a site that had.
That was just pure CSS.
Well, that had a specific. Like,
The hover state for touch mobile.
It looks
Yes.
decent.
We had two navigation elements. One was mobile that interacted.
Let me ask this: did you write it out yourself, or did you go grab it?
I don't know. Who was that? Like, you just make the other visible. Or not
Oh, so you have two
visible.
navigations.
Yes,
Yes, exactly.
one is invisible.
Inefficient.
Extremely good.
It's inefficient. Why do you have two navigations? Why not just have one? You got to push yourselves. Number one skill people want is JavaScript. Okay, so let's say you want to expand on that even further, right? I recommend then you go take a look at the one for my school site. Yeah, I know what you're talking about by having two menus. One is hidden, yeah, that's inefficient. Why do you have, that's like writing your navigation in 5 different HTML pages to me, right? So last but not least, I implore you to go read through the navigation for my school site because it is all based off of just what I showed you, where I have a main toggle function and when you click nav title on click, trigger the main toggle navigation, right? And then I have a sub toggle in there. In other words, I have on my site the main toggle, and I'm changing the icon there. And I also have sub toggle. So I would go and that forced me to, you know, push my JavaScript a little bit further. You got to push yourself, man. Going and grabbing things from the internet and then trying to figure out why they break is not pushing yourselves. It's okay, you can pass notes about me. Do you hate Mike? Yes or no?
And I can, all right.
Yeah, write out your code, man. The number one skill that people want is JavaScript. Love JavaScript is awesome. PHP programming is awesome. How many of you taking the WordPress class with me next quarter? I'm going to make you program in PHP. It's going to be fun. Simple programming using a framework in PHP. It's going to be real fun. Trust me, it's going to be fun. Believe me.
It's not bad, I took it, so. And I also like PHP, so.
To close, learn how to write your own goddamn jQuery.